everybody. Hello to the PHAIDRAcon. This is the first event in the PHAIDRAcon 2021. This is Roundtable1. And the topic in Roundtable1 is re-evaluating open source in academia. So this means how can open source help academia, especially when it comes to the topic of preservation of data, long-term preservation. So all the ecosystem with open source, how can they help us? How to bring it a new value or additional value to the academic. I like to introduce, or I like to give the words to introducing my panelists here. I'd like to start with Radu. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for this invitation. My name is Radu Meza. I am an associate professor at the College of Political, Administrative and Communication Sciences at Babeș-Bolyai University in Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania, Romania. Babeș-Bolyai University is the biggest higher education institution in Romania, with a number of about a bit over 40,000 active students. I am also the head of the digital media, the journalism and digital media department in my college, newly appointed. I also have the honor of coordinating the first digital media bachelor program in Romania since 2016. It's not been that long yet. My teaching duties kind of connect to today's topic because among the things that I teach in the digital media bachelor program are content management systems and editing in web languages, and I also teach a bit of web design in the masters. We at our college use quite a bit of, let's say, open source solutions. One of them is the learning management system Moodle, but also part of my teaching teaching either content management systems or teaching digital data analysis. I also use different open source solutions as part of my teaching, but also I'm open to kind of discussing the place of open source solutions in academic management. And I hope this discussion will be a fruitful one, and I think that's it for me.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Saeed Chaudhry. I'm an associate dean in the University Libraries at Johns Hopkins University, which is in Baltimore, Maryland, in the United States. It is the largest research university in the United States in terms of funding. I work in the library system, but my background is actually in engineering. I lead a group that is called the Digital Infrastructure Applications and Services Directorate. The emphasis of our work is to support the open scholarship or open science of the university. So we develop infrastructure applications and services around open access articles, open data, and open source software. Most recently, I've also assumed the role of being the director of an open source programs office, or OSPO, which we believe is the first of its kind within a US university. So I've spent a good portion of the last 2 years in particular looking at open source software in the academic context, in the library context, obviously within the US, but we are working with partners throughout the world to examine this topic. In particular, the relationship between data and software is one that I hope we can talk about during this particular roundtable. We often think about data as it relates or connects to articles, and I've made the argument that the connection between papers and articles and data is a mechanical one. It's typically a citation, sometimes even a one-way citation. But the relationship between data and software is much more complex, much richer, provides more insight. So I think open source software can be a more useful pathway in many ways to think about open data, including the long-term preservation aspects.
Thank you again for having me, inviting me to this discussion. My name's Danny Bernstein. I am the tech lead for the Phaidra repository project. Phaidra is one of several open source projects that is sort of under the stewardship of Lyrasis, which is a Atlanta-based company here in the U.S., nonprofit, and it has does various things in the community, but sort of as far as this conversation is concerned, I think emphasizing the open source sort of stewardship is a key part of what we're about, and so some of the projects, in addition to Phaidra, that are sort of under the Lyrasis umbrella, are DSpace, which is, I think everyone knows DSpace, a digital repository, CSpace, which is used in museum collections, archive space, and then there's the Palace project, which is in the e-lending and e-reading space for libraries. So as the tech lead, I'm responsible for coordinating and leading the open source community, mostly on the technical side. That involves leading the weekly meetings, organizing sprints, doing the releases, helping to bring out the different voices in the community to help us in our strategic planning and technical planning for the roadmap. And then I also have done and will be doing more training and workshops, especially now that we've just released Phaidra 6, which is an open source, is a new release of Phaidra with a new OCFL backend, which maybe we'll talk about that a little bit in this roundtable as it relates to the subject, really the long-term preservation and movement of your data through time.
Thank you, Danny. So I will introduce myself a little bit. I'm Raman. I work at the University of Vienna. I'm there responsible for the infrastructure for data management. So this means data preservation and data computing, but more data preservation. So I work with this very close with the library. I'm not based at the library, I'm based at the computer center, but we see that the whole data management is a topic which is not only related to libraries, it's also not only related to IT department, both are involved, and also the researcher or also the teaching should be involved, or is a big stakeholder in this whole part, because when it comes to open data, when it comes to open science, then it's also important to have the teaching aspect also with seen with the whole range of data, working with data and learning how to use data. So for this, we have a very good roundtable here. We have someone from a repository perspective, open source perspective. We have someone from a library, and we have someone from teaching and interacting with different kind of open source projects. For these, I like to ask the first question is, open source now, do you see it in a way of building software, or it's also about running communities, defining standards? And so what is open source for you? Maybe I start with Danny.
Yeah, so in looking at that first question, it seems like in my understanding and experience, the software is really a fundamental part of that whole process. But I really see this sort of open source process as a feedback loop that sort of, and there are different elements that sort of feed into each other and reinforce each other. So there's the collaboration, getting groups together from different institutions and trying to solve problems together. There's distilling those common problems. There's the developing of software. There are out of that process often comes a realization like, hey, actually there's a standard here, and then that sort of feeds back into the collaboration and more idea generation. And so I feel like the software development is really a strong sort of anchoring activity, even though it's in a way, it's when you're looking very long term, it's really not about the software. It's about the data, and it's about the data being able to move fluidly through time, and with the least amount of resistance. And so that's been a challenge, something that increasingly has been something that we've been focusing on with Phaidra. And I think that it's really a problem that folks have in any kind of open source data management system, and especially when you're talking about open data. And I would just add that I think there's another element, which is one of the elements that maybe isn't recognized as much, is there's a certain within this sort of open source community, there are values that sort of drive this the interest and participation in it. And so I think the whole approach to open source, open communities, open access, this is something that's inspiring to people. This is like and this is, I think, as in academia is also sort of shares in this value. So I think these two go together. There's a sort of harmony of values there that help drive the participation and sort of keep people engaged in this sort of long-term project. So that meaning, purpose, and I think that there's a certain amount of prestige that comes with this type of long-range thinking and participation in these projects that are sort of very sort of inspiring and sort of long range in their outlook.
So now I was muted. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, you mentioned the long range of the project. So that's really a long time. The software will be developed and updated and keep alive, and to inspire the people with the open approach and the openness. And I think the openness is also a big driver for the libraries in academia with the open access and open data. Since maybe Said, you can add something to this.
Yeah, so I think to the point about community, I've been working with some people in the open source world the last 2 years. One of them is Denise Cooper, who actually started the first open source programs office when she was at Sun Microsystems. She makes this distinction between open code and open source software. So if I produce code and I put it in a repository, that's open code, but it becomes open source software when you have a community that's actively engaged in supporting it, sustaining it, developing it, building out the community, and a community of users who provide feedback. And there's a clear understanding of how that feedback influences what the community of developers is doing. So I would say community is a key part of open source software as a foundational type of principle. And I think that community being committed to being open and transparent is incredibly important for preservation and for sustainability reasons. So it's not trivial, but it's easier to focus on the preservation of both software and data if you are open and transparent. And Another term I've heard from people in the open source world is a culture of inspection. So this idea that it's just a natural part of that community's working to be open and to have inspections of the code, inspections of the data, and so on. And I think the funders in the United States, and I would imagine others as well, are increasingly recognizing that you can focus on open data directly. But if you don't have the software, even if it's not for 50 years, you don't understand how the data were used, how they were processed, how they were analyzed, how they were shared, and so on. So the libraries, generally speaking, I think this is true throughout the world, make these kinds of arguments about openness. So it's not only a value and a principle, there are some pragmatic reasons why it's very important to be open in terms of thinking about data and software in the long-term stewardship of them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, this is you mentioned the relation between the software and the data, and also the data stewardship, also to work with data. And I think that's also an important value and an important topic when it comes to teaching and to work with students. How do you see this, Radu?
Well, there's, I think, several aspects, and I think I make use of open source software in my teaching in both, but I think in two courses mainly, in content management systems. And of course, there's such a wide range of content management solutions out there, but even myself, with my, let's say, background working on different, let's say, website projects, I've mostly made use of open source web content management systems from, I know, Joomla to Drupal to Typo3 to Concrete and others. But I also use them in the teaching, and also write the, let's say, WordPress system. I also use them in my teaching, and I teach students how to use them, because I think these are the solutions that will develop due to the fact that they have communities behind them, and because they develop, let's say, a lot of, let's say, plugins, extensions in their ecosystems due to the work of different individuals that contribute. And then, of course, some of them are going to be like free, some of them are going to be freemium, but that doesn't matter. It just matters that the whole platform, let's say, the whole core will survive longer and will thrive due to the fact that it has this dynamic, it has this organic growth over a longer time. And we can see, if you look at the market shares, right, of the open source web content management systems, right? And I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, it was Joomla and Drupal, and WordPress was just used for blogging. Now it's mostly WordPress. But then there's a few newcomers, right? New systems that have been developed in the past few years, and open source is really big on this web content management systems market. And I try to expose my students to as a diverse as possible landscape of, because we don't know what's going to be the leading web CMS in the next 15 years, right? So in order to prepare for the future, we talk about principles, and also we talk about the importance of maybe getting to know as many solutions as possible. And also maybe in our context, right, it's not necessarily a great idea to jump to, let's say, enterprise solutions, which are expensive and are a further burden would be a burden on an extra burden on our budgets. And secondly, I think the other place where we use these solutions is in data analysis. There's wonderful software that we use that's been developed by researchers in universities in Germany, in Austria. There's one that I particularly use, FacePager, for interacting with APIs in a non-coding environment, let's say, right? Or there's one from a researcher in Japan that also, and in this case, particularly, I'm thinking about how with open source software, if you have like a text analysis software, we have a lot of tools for the English language and for a few other languages. And then there's, let's say, languages that are often neglected, and there's not enough money like on a national level for research to develop the proper tools. But this kind of open source software allows to use, let's say, the framework of a piece of software that was built for text and analytics, and then add in, just plug in the language elements that you want for your language, and then make it work for a different language as well. So I think that's also, let's say, a great opportunity. I don't want to monopolize the conversation, so I'm going to stop right here.
Thank you, Radu. So you talked about principles, and also the examples. What you just brought is one of the principles. I see it very much in open source is not only to share something. Sharing is also an important part, but also to contribute to a community. And this is also something what I'm thinking now is this principles of contributing to a community, a way how really to preserve data in an environment where so many things are changing at the moment. What do you think, Said?
Yeah, I think this is a key point. We can have different definitions of community, but I think emphasizing the idea of contribution is a very, very useful metric, if you will, and both on the developer side and the user side, right? So users can contribute requirements, for example, or feedback and so on. I think one of the challenges that I see actually is I'd like to believe we all agree having a healthy, thriving community is important for open source and open data. But one of the challenges I see is how do we scale communities from what we might euphemistically call friend of a friend network to, in my view, this sort of nice inflection point that might happen with a community when you get a contribution or you get feedback from a user you do not know. These are not people that you've cultivated directly through your own network or your network of people you know. One of the people I've been working with for the last few years in the open source programs office is someone named Stephen Wally. He's an executive of Microsoft. He has this wonderful metaphor about cooking. So if you think about cooking a meal for yourself, that generally is an easy thing most of us can manage, and we know exactly what we want and there's no issue. As soon as you cook for someone else, you have to account for this person's preferences and so on. And then if you try to plan a family dinner, it's a little more complicated. You have to start thinking about dietary preferences and so on. And if you run a catering business, then you don't provide individual meals for each person. You start, generalizing it, having sort of a, a la carte type of approach. And then imagine running a large food production system for 10,000 people. All of those require very different approaches to cooking. And there's a very interesting metaphor to software development and how your community has to operate in those different modes. And I think that, I'll just turn the mirror on libraries, at least in the US. I think the libraries in the US have gone a certain way down that pathway. But I don't know that we've figured out how to build that community at the scale of, sort of the large industrial food production metaphor. So I think that's one of the things I hope we can emphasize over the next few years.
This is a very interesting metaphor, what you tell, and I think it makes it right. So to scale up, it's not easy, and if you have on a different level, you must find really the right way how to produce the software and how to build the community around. I'm very interested in what you think about, Danny, from the perspective of a developer or a technical leader in an open source community?
Yeah, I was gonna, I think Saeed's point is a really a good one. I think one of the things that's like on sort of on the ground, one of the practical struggles is that part of what motivates people to participate in these projects is the sense of sort of collective purpose, and also there's a certain sense of kind of belonging that I think is really key. And that sense of belonging really comes through engagement and involvement, and also you know, learning sort of learning the process that this project or that project uses to develop the software. And so you kind of come in and you sort of learn the process, you start to harmonize with the other folks on the team, you're collaborating over, you know, wide distances and often across time zones. And that's actually kind of hard to do, to get people sort of engaged in that way. So, you know, sometimes people sort of tap in, they have a change that they want to make, and they offer, you know, they make a pull request, and and you know, we can bring that in. But what we really want is people to be, you know, coming to meetings, really understand, like, you know, how we want to do, you know, say the code standards that we have, and you know, how we like to, you know, the standards for what is complete, and you know, how well what we expect in terms of testing in order for it to be contributed. And you know, it's a very heavy lift. And so, you know, it's always a question of how much do we ask of the community, you know, and it's this you know, tension between trying to kind of cajole and encourage people to come in, but also wanting to maintain a certain standard that keeps those who are already like deeply invested kind of feeling good, and you know, they're not having to, you know, to reduce the amount of friction that they have to experience in order to keep the project moving forward. So it's tough. And then you know, scaling up is that the more folks that you get involved, the harder it is. So, you know, some of the things that we do is we have our process published and, you know, readily available. And so when folks come in, we direct them to that. And then, you know, there's also, we sort of emphasize a very strong culture of invitation and sort of collegiality and friendliness. So like having a strong code of conduct, so which helps to maintain the sense of friendliness, which is really the sort of lubricant that helps these and fertilizer for these organizations.
Thank you, Danny. What I'm now thinking about, you talked a lot about to be engaged and also to have different roles and for also to contribute this on a long term and have different aspects, and being really on the project over a long time and see it, how you scale it up, how you be part of the community. Now I'm interested in how do you see that maybe the academic environment where it's not for profit, could this be an interesting ecosystem where more people can come out, or we can improve it there to bring people the interest to engage to open source?
I think in general, universities are trying to, or higher education institutions are trying to open up towards communities. I mean, it's also one of the dimensions that at least universities in the eastern part of Europe are still struggling with, because I don't think they have it in their, let's say, in their background. But then universities in general, right, wherever, are trying to sort of open up to the community. And I think this is just another dimension of that. It's opening up their, let's say, publications, right, through supporting, and this is also like funding agencies are going that way, right? Asking researchers, right, to only publish in open access, right? And then universities themselves are opening up resources, pooling resources for research for each other, right? They have like common infrastructure projects. This is what I'm seeing, right? So that's a different dimension of the same thing, I guess. And then opening up courses to members of the community. This is something that I'm seeing in my university, right? So we have like senior citizens coming in for like courses. So that's another dimension. And then the way we, let's say, do sort of data governance, we do some resource governance in the university, and we try to adopt a more open approach towards it. I think that's another dimension, but I think it's a general phenomenon of opening up that's happening in universities. For some aspects of it, there's external pressures like funding agencies saying you need to publish in open access because this is public money. And then, you know, there's the whole debate, but we won't get into that. But I think as, let's say, new technologies develop, and especially as we're kind of moving towards unpredictable times, we need to be more open about what we're doing, because the community needs to know what resources we have and what resources we can pool together, what we can spare and what we can share. And that refers to not only like research resources, it's maybe we have some courses that might help, maybe we have some results that might help. So we think that in a way it's part of a more general phenomenon that is happening, and it's opening up to the community. And the university's approach towards open source solutions and some sort of standards that allow for wide-scale use of open source solutions and sharing in between different entities, government, public entities, other higher education institutions, and international partners. That's a part of it as well.
So, thank you. Yes, you mentioned a lot of good things. You mentioned the budget, and also finding ways to budget, because open source and academia, I think both are always rely on budget and external funding. You mentioned resources, how to share and how to contribute to each community. There are really good aspects, and we are already coming to an end of this roundtable. So for this, and picking up your statement on the resources, I like to see a kind of a vision for the next years of you, how we can contribute from each other, how we can exchange resources or contribute or see how we can work closer together from open source, or with open source and with academia. I would like to start with you, Rada, because you bring this topic up.
Thank you. I'm interested in, I mean, I have, like, let's say, my personal area of interest, but I'm gonna try to speak in like more general terms. I think we are facing a time of rapid change, and that's, I think that's maybe an understatement at this point, because it's so fast and unexpected, and at the same time we're forced still to find solutions. And I think the quickest way to find a solution is to maybe see what worked for somebody else. I think is that it's something that we do naturally, and instead of like trying to maybe come up with a solution on our own, we look at like, okay, what are others doing about this? How have others already solved this problem? And it's a quicker decision process. And then, of course, considering all the, let's say, unexpected context that we are in, I think, let's say, budgets are a bit tight because we are with, let's say, a great, this is like one of the one axiom from communication science is like we have a great deal of uncertainty. So of course we need more information to kind of clear up that uncertainty. And when we have a lot of uncertainty, it's difficult to act, it's difficult to say something, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen, we don't know what the situation is. So I think that's also part of the way that the budgets are managed. I mean, there's some areas that are invested in, but there's a great deal of uncertainty, and so people are not that willing to take risks right now with budgets. But I think what happens is, putting these two together, is we're seeing examples of good practice in a lot of places, and open source solutions are visible because they have dynamic communities behind them, and also they represent a lower risk because we see exactly what is, and we see how others have made use of it. So then I think that's a key advantage here in terms of finding open source solution to help academia in different areas. I think it's how these open source solutions are observable and how they represent, I think, maybe a lower risk from several points of view. I don't know about the future yet, about sustainability and about, and I think I worry more about the future in terms of how this is going to be implemented, in terms of who's going to use it and who's going to maybe push at organizational level the use of any particular solution. But I'm guessing it's easier to maybe push a solution that does not strain the budget that much, and that's proven, let's say, to have worked in a similar scenario, than push a new solution that's a strain on the budget, and that's maybe unproven, or we don't know enough about it, and we don't really we don't have a possibility to kind of adapt or add to it somehow, or contribute or adjust to our scenario.
Thank you, Radu. Danny, I'd like to give you the word.
Sure, yeah. The way I've been thinking about things of late is much more is in this sense that we're in the midst of this and have been actually for several decades, this transformation to digital from essentially mechanical type. The last time this kind of revolution happened was 500 years ago, 600 years ago. And I think it's important to keep in mind that we're sort of in the beginning of this process, and we still have a huge amount of opportunity to shape it. And I think that my line is, and I think a lot of, I think we're all on the same page in this, and in that open source is really the best opportunity, gives us the best opportunity to shape this process in the public interest. So we wind up with something that is really serving, humanity in the long run. And so, yeah, I think that's sort of the backdrop. And I think that in terms of, budgets, I think I think that supporting open source, whether it's bringing offering development staff, or if organizations are constrained that they can't actually support development staff, maybe it makes sense to give monetary support to open source projects so that those projects can hire and recruit folks to work on them. So I guess one point is that projects, I think, in order to be sustainable, have to have both volunteer contributors, and there's the community there, but having also folks who are paid staff members to kind of maintain the continuity and ensure the level of quality is important in a sense to hold the center. And so really encouraging folks to understand and helping the open source users to understand that open source has to be supported financially, and that can be done in a variety of ways, but becoming members of projects and as, if not more importantly, showing up at the table and lending your voice to shape that process. And then one other thought is also that hosted services are often a good solution for organizations. So you're using the open source software, but you don't necessarily have to personally manage it. And a lot of times that frees organizations up to to focus their energies on the work that they do best, rather than having to maintain a system on site. And so I think a lot of organizations, especially smaller ones who don't have the budget to have staff to run these systems, can really benefit by taking advantage of open source hosted services.
Yes, thank you, Danny. I see the same. We do this also. And I think this is also a way how we can bring budget here to this. Said, I'd like to hear a little bit of your point of view, of your vision.
So just build on comments that we've heard already. So if you think about 100 years ago, when we had last global pandemic, it wasn't nearly as widespread as what's happening right now. To Danny's points, there were many movements, political, social, economic, that were in play that were accelerated after the last pandemic happened. And the same thing will happen now. And I think there's recognition of that. And I think one of the fundamental questions that's coming up is that what institution or what group of people do we rely on to make these kinds of changes happen? You think about the climate change summit that just happened. A lot of the criticism of that is, why aren't you talking to small communities of indigenous people, local communities that are actually doing things about climate change, rather than talking to governments who talk about it as they did 10 years ago and so on. And I think there's recognition of open source as a verb, not only a noun, but a verb as a way of working together. So I think this idea that open source is a way for collective action to happen through communities of like-minded, or like interests, I think will be a really key theme as we move forward.
Thank you. Thank you all attendees to the roundtable. It was really a great discussion. It was a lot of interesting thoughts there. I like the idea we talked about, and I hope we can stay in contact and bring this discussion a little bit further. It's really nice. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here.
Thank you. Have a nice day or evening.
Yeah.